today we're going to talk about playbooks. Playbooks for growth, playbooks that the fastest growing apps in the world are using right now. Things that are under the surface that if you just ask them, they would say, we do price testing, we do growth testing, we do this. But underneath, there's a lot of things that they do differently that allow them to extend how much value they get from their growth. So we're going to talk through that today. Let's talk about this first. I'll ask a couple of people, what is the biggest constraint to growth testing that you guys have right now? Anyone want to shout out a couple of things? Like, what slows down growth testing for you?
Ad spend.
Ad spend, yeah.
Product.
What do you mean by product?
Working with engineers. Product
Yep.
development.
Dev resources, probably design resources too. Cool. Okay. Analytics, yes. Okay. So we're going to talk a little about constraints because that has a big part in plays a big factor in how we do growth testing, and currently in the world that we're in right now, where AI is reducing or eliminating technical and resource barriers that in these new apps that are coming out, understanding what your real constraints are is the key to unlocking fast, rapid growth. So during the next 5 minutes, we're going to talk about playbooks of the fastest growing apps. We're going to dig under the surface and figure out what gives them persistent differential returns on their testing efforts. Cool. So who am I? I'm a growth product manager by background. I'm a practitioner at heart. For 5 years, I PM'd the top grossing utility app in the US. And by the time I left, we were generating 40 million a year in revenue. I got receipts. At Superwall, I work with the top 60 customers that we have. They have a combined 435 million annual recurring revenue. They've run more than 6,400 tests with Superwall using more than 70,000 paywalls. And I personally run about 250 experiments a year. So let's dig in. I do. Let's start with growth process. So we're going to look at this first playbook here, which is understanding what your actual constraints are. So understanding your constraints is key to running rapid experiments. We mentioned dev resources, design resources, sprint prioritization, release cadences. Analytics were also mentioned, ad spend. Most companies will say these are the biggest constraints that they have to growth testing, but they shouldn't be your constraints. I also hear things frequently like, we don't know strategically what to test next. But the translation for this is, I don't really know what to do that's not going to burn my very precious resources. And so we've created this limitation. If we have all these constraints, we sort of reduce the amount of ideas that we can test at pace. But if you remove design and dev resources from the equation, if you reduce sprint cycles, if you can eliminate app releases, you can dramatically decrease the cost of running tests by orders of magnitude. So your actual constraint to growth should actually be users, not dev or design resources. Your users that come in, the user volume that they have, your onboarding completion, your activation, your engagement, those should be your core limitations of what you're able to test, not dev and design resources. So here's what these apps do differently. For dev and design resources, they use no-code tools that allow PMs, marketing, and growth people to run tests. To get around sprint prioritization or app release cadences, they buy or build testing tools. And to increase the testing velocity, they improve or buy the right analytics, to your point. Things that allow you to predict and accurately measure the right KPIs to be able to run experiments at scale at the speed of your user volume, not your dev resources. Cool. So play number 1, eliminate constraints until your only limit is user volume. Number 2, we want to hit the variable sweet spot. So most orgs will either go way too small in their testing or way too big. The reality is you want to be right in the middle. And so, for example, these are 2 paywalls, but the only thing I've changed is this bit of copy. And you might think that has an impact. But in reality, that test could end up taking 3 months to figure out anything statistically significant. It's way too small. Whereas in this experiment, comparing these 2, these are totally different design concepts, totally different content with totally different pricing. But I see apps do this all the time. Where they're like, we tested this new variant and it's working better. I'm like, cool, what about it's working better? And you can't tell when your test's too big. So what you really want to do is hit the sweet spot. And this is what the fastest growing apps do. They find this balance in the middle using a growth lever framework. So at Superwall, we built this framework that we use to basically bundle types of growth tests into different categories. And what we do, the way I work with customers is I rarely blend multiple categories at once. What I'll typically do, or the way that the best practice is, pricing and packaging, paywall design, messaging, placement and frequency, and personalization fit into separate categories. And you rarely ever want to test across these in the same paywall variant. You typically want to keep them tight. So for example, I can run a 3-day trial versus 7-day trial, and that fits in this price and packaging category, but I'm not going to take a 3-day trial variant with different messaging and test it against my control that has a 7-day trial, because now I don't know what's actually making it work. But these categories are all broad enough that you can have things change within them. So for example, in price and packaging design, this is what we would consider like a whole segment unto itself, and you can unlock a lot of value from it. So I might test something that has 2 products shown versus 1 product on my paywall with a view all plans button. Or I might test something that has an exit offer on my paywall that doesn't. And those involve more design changes, more copy changes, but they still fit nice and tightly within that one category. So using growth lever framework like this allows you to run experiments freely and quickly without going too small or too big. So, cool. All right, let's talk about layering experiments. So the third thing that these orgs do is they layer their experiments very tightly because they're testing, again, at the speed of their user volume, not at the speed of their release cadence. So what is that? Here's a scenario. So test A runs for 2 weeks, but once it's paused, it's going to need another 8 days for all the retention data from those trials to come in. While test A is paused, I start test B, so that by the time test A's data is mature, test B will have some other data that I'll have with some other variant that's improving or not improving. So doing this allows you to run things really quickly at the speed of your users, not at and without waiting for your test to mature every single time. So here's a visual of how that works. So I have test 1, while I'm collecting my trials pay data, test 2 starts running, and by the time test 2 is done, test 1 has mature data, I can combine my winners into test 3. Here's a quick note though. The key to experiment layering is picking variants where in test B, my hypothesis is not dependent on the result of test 1 or test A. So I'm going to keep those separate. So for example, I might try in test A, a 3-day trial versus 14-day trial and see how that performs. But I'm not going to test something in test B that's going to have some dependency on test A. So I might do like a CTA copy test or something like that. Something that typically falls in the background that I'm not going to prioritize. But those are really easy tests that you can pop in there when you're waiting for data to mature from a broader, bigger test that you're running. Cool. So playbook number 3, layer experiments to maximize testing velocity. Cool. Let's talk about pricing. So there's a lot that we can do with pricing alone that these apps do. And the first one is they test and then retest pricing every 3 to 9 months. This might seem fast, but at the rate that apps are coming alive, at the competitive landscape, the way that small teams are building apps with AI, allowing them to move really quickly, this is the right frequency to run experiments. So why so frequently? Well, 1, your consumer behavior changes. Every month, new AI apps are coming out that have new experiences that users are using. And we've heard multiple times today that more and more consumers are getting comfortable with AI apps, and the trend is starting to shift, where it's becoming a popular part of vernacular and part of popular usage. So your consumer behavior changes. 2, your traffic from UA sources change over time. I have a customer who ran a price test where they charged $30 per year and then $80 per year. What happened over the next 5 days was a lot of volatility in their meta traffic. And at the end of the 5 days, the meta algorithm finally started to get the hint that there's a whole different segment that's willing to pay for this at $80. And now their whole business changed and their core demographic changed because the models were able to start picking up on the different type of user that needed to target. And then finally, your own product changes, right? You're constantly adding features, you're improving them, you're constantly evolving the product, you're improving your onboarding activation rates. As that changes, another way of saying it is your product is constantly adding value. And as you constantly add value, you can change your messaging, you can change your design, and then you can retest your pricing as well. So pricing play number one, test and retest your pricing regularly. Number two, we're going to talk about price personalization. So a lot of these apps are starting to explore asking the question, what is the right price for every user at this given moment? But when we run price tests, typically what we're asking is not, well, what we think we're asking is, what's the right price for my product? What we're actually answering is, what's the right price for my business? Because you find something kind of works for everybody. But there's a huge range of users and user experiences, and their behavior changes pretty drastically. So this year, we started beta testing a new feature that we call Demand Score that asks the question, what is each user's unique ability to purchase at any given moment? And we built this model using 100 million paywall interactions and based on things like total paywall views, time since install, your device model, your country. And it basically ranks users on a scale from 0 to 99. And within that, we're able to determine what their purchase power is. So for example, 1 in the spectrum, 99 is the highest purchase power, 0 is the lowest. What you see in blue here are installs that did not convert. What you see in red are the conversions. And what you can see is that this app for this particular customer, they had a lot of people that they thought were the right target user that they were getting, and they were converting well in that segment. So you can see people who are willing to pay more are converting well. But what they didn't realize is they had this long tail of users who were installing who were converting pretty poorly. And that's a big chunk of users. And so when you see this, you start to ask questions like, do I need a lower tier level of my subscription product that these particular users are willing to pay for? Do I need to segment them into some other market and show a whole different price to them and offer them something different? You come with so many different hypotheses. Another one that I'm working with a customer on, we've changed it where they have a similar curve, but anyone in this upper tier market, we default to their higher tier plan. And if you're in the lower tier market, we default to their lower tier plan. Here's another example. This customer that I worked with, they're a popular health and fitness category app. These are the users they want. And they were priced for this segment. But they had no idea they were getting this volume of users who were basically unable to purchase. And you can see, most of their conversions come from this upper tier segment. But then down here, it's pretty sparse relative to the amount of users they have. So when you start to think through this and figure out how to understand your user's purchase power on a spectrum, you start to come with new hypotheses for how to personalize the price for those users. So play number 2, start asking the question, what is the right price for each individual user? Number 3, when faced with more revenue or more users, these customers choose users. So I have a customer, last year I ran a price elasticity test. We tested one price that they were only running as their control and then one that was 2x the price. The result was 14.7% increase in net revenue, like net proceeds. And then that proceeds would have resulted in 1.85 million per year extra. It's a big chunk of change, but it would have cost them 38% of their total converted users. So that's a big trade-off. Do I want almost $2 million more per year, or do I want to have 38% fewer paying users? Every time an app that I work with faces this scenario, they always choose user growth. Cool. So play number 3, in a growth phase, optimize for user growth over revenue. Number 4, this is more of a tactical strategic play, but you want to organize international pricing to make it way easier to run experiments. And that's because international price optimization compounds in the amount of time it takes to run tests well. So whether you do it through App Store Connect or some other product, we have identified another constraint that makes international price testing really hard. So there are 2 typical methods for international price testing. 1, set prices directly in App Store Connect or Google Play Console. Option 2 is I'm going to create new products that I'm going to actually show to specific countries. So again, we've come up with this scenario where like, I don't love either of these. So the fastest growing apps use what we call a tiered market segments. So this is pretty typical. This is just an example, but you might organize tier 1 is going to be US, sometimes US, Canada, and Great Britain. Tier 2 is going to be my next set of markets, which is usually identified by a step change in your conversion rate. And you can almost always tell by market where my top markets are and then my next segment. And then tier 3, sorry, I should say 3, don't look at that. All the markets get my next price point. And what you would typically organize your pricing around is tier 1 is usually my higher price segments. So I'm going to show my products with the highest LTV. Tier 2 is going to be my next drop off in LTV price. And then tier 3 was typically the lowest price I'm willing to accept to convert those users. So this allows you to really efficiently run experiments on categories of markets instead of trying to optimize the price every single time for every single market. Cool. So play number 4, simplify international pricing to optimize for testing speed. Cool. All right, let's talk monetization models because there's a lot of things changing. It used to be that you would show a free trial and you have a yearly subscription and a monthly subscription. We're all happy. Things are going great. The monetization models that apps are using right now are changing quite a bit, especially as AI apps that have a lot of costs start to come into the market. So the first one is we're going to explore potential of app to web. So since the court ruling in May, there's been a whole world open to app developers. Early adopters are now starting to figure out what works and what doesn't. And every test I've run with customers, this is what the data says. I can accept a 42% cut in my conversion rate on my paywall and before I start to break even versus in-app purchase. This is consistent across every test I've run. There's a point at which the additional friction costs so many users that I'm going to actually lose overall revenue, but that's a pretty big chunk that you can drop down. And that's because trial conversion rate lifts hit usually a 27 to 54% percentage point lift. That means if you were at 50% trial to pay conversion in your in-app purchases, you're looking more like a 77 or higher percent trial to pay conversion rate. I have a customer who's currently getting a 92% trial to pay conversion rate, which is on web, which is crazy. Like I've never seen anything like that. So there's a huge opportunity, especially if you can reduce this. When a user sees a paywall and they actually convert to a trial or a direct subscription, if you can get that closer to like the 25 range, you're going to increase your proceeds per user pretty dramatically. So here's the caveat. If you're in the Apple Small Business Program, every test I've run shows that it's basically break even at best. Like when Apple only takes 15%, you're not really making much money in that case. So what are app developers actually doing with app to web right now? So tool-wise, some of them use custom web checkout. A lot of them are turning to merchant records like Paddle. So we're shipping an app or a feature integration with Paddle that we're really stoked about because Paddle takes care of your taxes and fees, it takes care of your refunds, takes care of chargebacks, just like Apple does. Makes it, as an app developer, it's kind of a seamless way to think about how to move from an app purchase to app to web. It also pays out way faster than Apple does. Apple is like 45 days plus to pay out your proceeds. Paddle and other providers pay out way faster. And then some of my customers will use like other web payment processors, like you use Stripe. There's a bunch of others, like I think Lemon Squeezy and others. Most of them are less, but you can use other payment processors that also pay out fast, but you start to have to manage taxes or refunds yourself. Taxes are weird with web purchases. Like in the US, every state has their own tax bracket that once you hit a certain amount, you have to start paying taxes, but every state's different. And you don't have to manage that headache. Like I don't want to have to know how much tax or when I start paying tax in Wyoming. Cool. All right, tactically, here's a few things that some of my customers are doing with app to web. This is something that's kind of genius that I wish I had thought of, but my customer did. So he actually ran a test where he mixed and matched checkout payment methods, where all of his yearly purchases would go through app to web, but he sent his monthlies directly to in-app purchase. And he did this because his monthly subs didn't provide enough LTV value for him to have to worry about managing taxes, fees, chargebacks, but his yearlies were worth it. And the people who are willing to purchase yearly are going to convert at a higher rate and have a higher trial to pay conversion rate. So this is a pretty cool test. I really like running it. It performed pretty well for him. A lot of my customers are using complementary uses of app to web in their UX. So for one example, win-backs is an easy opportunity for you. If you already have a user who paid once, getting the pay again has a pretty high conversion rate, even though there's additional friction to purchase through a web checkout. Some of my customers are using it exclusively for transaction abandon offers. I'm gonna talk about those a little bit more in a second. And then I have some who will show in-app purchase and onboarding, and then as the life cycle goes on and users continue to dismiss paywalls and not purchase, they'll offer cascading discounts over time and send them directly to web, because they can offer a deeper discount and still maintain or grow the proceeds that they end up from those users. Cool. Here's a question. What would it take to shift 100% of your traffic to app to web? It's a scary thought, right? But I have one customer who's fully done it. He ran the test, he did all of his due diligence, and this is an app at scale making $5 million in annual recurring revenue per year, and he shifted 100% of his traffic to web checkout. So, all right. So here's some of my top recommended tests. 1, take a paywall that you have now, don't change a thing, just send it directly to an app to web checkout flow. Don't change any UX, because you want to first understand how much does the friction actually cost me. Like, I don't want to pitch a 20% discount by purchasing web. I don't want to change any of the UX. I just want to send it directly there and see how much that friction ends up costing me over time. If more than 70% of your users purchase an annual plan, run that test that I showed where you send your annual traffic to app to web, and your monthlies or weeklies go through in-app purchase. And then if you collect email address or some other contact info, you can send proactive offers to go through app to web to those users by the time those users reach the paywall, so that even if they abandon and leave the product, now they have an email waiting for them with an offer that goes through app to web that fits outside of Apple. Cool. So monetization play number 1, think creatively about ways to test app to web. Number 2, test alternate offers throughout the user's lifetime. So I mentioned I was gonna come back to transaction abandon. I wanna talk about that in depth for a second, but there's lots of ways to think about this, including exit offers, paywall decline offers, etc. Transaction abandon is an event that occurs when a user sees a paywall, they tap the CTA, the Apple purchase sheet slides up, but then the user hesitates. And they hesitate for a lot of reasons, but they tap this X. And so some of those reasons might be price sensitivity, price uncertainty, maybe they need a longer trial, maybe they tap by accident because of some dark UX pattern. But when this happens, you can trigger a paywall based on this, but let's look at what the data says first. This behavior is not uncommon. Like, if you had to guess, how many people start a transaction and then don't complete it? Anyone want to guess what that might be? 80%? That's pretty high. But yeah, you're kind of in the range. You want to 50%? Okay, cool. You guys are in that range. So what we find is that 57% of transactions get abandoned for the top performing apps that we see. In some rare scenarios, less than 40% of them will, in some rare scenarios, they'll have less than 40% abandonment rate, but that's rare. But it's not uncommon that I see apps that have 70+% transaction abandon rate without doing any shady UX at all. And on Android, poor Android, it's way higher. It's close to like 70 to 79% transaction abandon rate for those users. And it affects apps of every scale. So this is in the Superwall dashboard. I can see in this scenario, I had 364,000 users start a checkout, 208,000 abandon them, and then I can see how many users converted. But in the same scenario, I have much smaller scale, so I have 50,000 started checkouts, 35,000 abandoned, and I've got 18,000 total conversions. It affects apps of every scale out there. So what? Won't these users come back and purchase anyways? Well, not according to the data. Here's what our data shows. Only 16 to 23% of those users will come back and actually purchase within the next 30 days, which means you have this huge opportunity of low risk users that you can offer a discount to try and win them back without risk of cannibalizing your total revenue. So monetization model play number 2, use transaction abandon campaigns. Cool. All right. I want to leave time for Q&A. So I put some additional plays in here that I think are worth testing, but I don't have as much data around, so I want to mention it to you and see what you guys think. So the first is I see a lot of my customers starting to use physical or adjacent services to increase subscriber retention. So for example, I have a health and fitness app that is now starting to offer lab work with that, where you can go to LabCorp or Quest or some others, take blood work, that data gets sent back to the app to have their AI start to help inform you about where are the numbers off? And then you can immediately from there link to a medical professional to be able to actually start taking action on your health concerns. That is a totally different experience than just something that tells you what your health score is currently looking like based on your current behavior. A lot of my customers are trying to explore paid intro offers instead of trials. So we have a design that we like a lot where we call it design your trial style paywall, where on that paywall we show 2 yearly plans, but one has a 7-day trial and the other one has 30 days for $5. And this provides your users options. And when we see this, the data continues to show that time and time again, your initial conversion rate goes up, but long-term, your trial to pay conversion rate goes up significantly over time because you're giving users choice. You're letting them select what they want. And so much of the time, we create these paywall flows where users have no choice but to start a trial to continue to use the product and see what it's like. This at least gives your users some flexibility to understand and make the trade-off. Is 7 days for free a good deal, or do I pay a little bit of money and now I have choice to spend 30 days with this product? Cool. And then the last thing here that I'll mention is that a lot of my AI customers are starting to blend subscriptions with one-time purchases to try and offset some of the costs of AI usage. So we're used to providing subscriptions where if you subscribe, you get unlimited access to everything. But AI tools cost money every time you dip and hit an API. So what they're starting to do is, even their higher tier limits, they're starting to put caps on how many credits that they get. And then if you want to go beyond that, you can buy packs of credits. So they're starting to blend in that. And then sometimes they'll let freemium users go through and buy like a small pack. And then there's on that paywall is an option to subscribe and save. And think about like Amazon commodity products. Like you can buy one time, or I can subscribe and save 10% with every purchase. So there's lots of room to test different ways to monetize users. So with that, I want to pause, let you guys ask any questions. If you guys have questions, let's see, lunch is going to be soon, but across all these playbooks, I'll say this, there's lots of flexibility, but ultimately our whole thesis at Superwall is test everything. Don't bring an opinion to a data fight. Whatever it is, continue to run good experiments, have good analytics, run the tests, see how it plays out, and then make a decision.